Method return. This is the code from the last lesson. We created a class called calc and we used its method plus to make a simple plus calculation. As you can see, it returns void, nothing. In this lesson I wanted to return z, the int. To do that we will need to use a return statement or the return syntax. Let's see what Java documentation has to say about this. A method returns to the code that invoked it when it completes all statements in the method, reaches a return statement, or throws an exception, whichever occurs first. You declare a method return type in its method declaration. Within the body of the method, you use the return statement to return the value. Any method declared void doesn't return a value. It does not need to contain a return statement. Basically, when you write return and return a value, that's usually when the function stops, when the method stops, 90% of the times. And if you have an error, it will throw an exception basically. But in most cases it will return the value if you don't have any errors. And if it's void, as you can see here, we don't need return. So basically you declare the value you want to return, the data type you want to return. Here, after the keyword for the scope, our scope is public. The method is visible inside and outside of the class, usable inside and outside of the class. And then you need to declare the return type, and then the name of the method and the method's argument and the execute code. In the execute code we will put a return statement. So we won't need this for a while. Let's comment this out and we will change the void to an int. Now you see we get an error. This method must return a result of type int. So what this means is that we declare that it returns int, so it must return an int. Let's write return 0. Now we don't have an error because we return an int. But I don't want to return 0, I want to return z. So let's change it to z. So here it also says that, let's see, a method returns to the code that invoked it. So basically now we need some kind of code to invoke the method, right? Let's save it. So inside main we will delete all of this. If we just call c.plus and give it some numbers and run it, you will see nothing will be outputted because we commented the output. So what does it do? It returns the int, so now you have an int here, but you have nothing to capture the int. So what we need to do is declare an int variable, and let's call it blah. Now the int that will return from this method will be stored inside of blah. It will be 23 because 1 plus 22 is 23. So let's output it. So when I run it, you will see 23. So when we return z, it comes from here to here, and this whole thing returns z, and it goes inside int. Let's create another method and call it let's call it output plus. Public, it will return a string, so we will write the string data type after our scope declaration, and then we'll call it, how did we want to call it? Let's call it plus s, as short for plus string. It will get also x and y. Let's also put a comment where it ends, so we know where it ends. Now we have an error because we haven't returned the string. So what I want to do is create an int and call it res, short for result, and I want to use this plus to do all of this again. So as you can see, we can use methods inside of the class, not only outside of the class. So to use this code, I will just call plus, and I will pass x and y to this plus, and I want to output it. No, basically, I want to create a formatted string that will show the calculation. Let's call it ret, short for return, and I will copy this part. Now we have x, and then we increment the plus and the y and the equals, and we need to increment the result in the end, because in the result we do the calculation using this code. And now I will return ret. So what we do here is we use the previous method, the plus method, put it inside an int called res, and then we format the calculation into a string using pluses to increment more strings to our ints. We don't get an error for type mismatch because we basically convert those ints, the x and y, and res to a string by incrementing strings to them. This happens automatically. So let's use plus s. So let's create. Let's comment this out first, and let's create another string to hold the result we will get from plus s. Let's call the string test calc, and we will call c, the calc object, and then plus s. Yeah, we will give it 2 plus 3, and now we will output it. The reason I don't output it here is because the user of this method, the programmer, might want to put it as a text object in his GUI application or in the browser if it's a web application. So I don't limit him to outputting to the console. So once he gets that string using the calc class and the calc method, he can do whatever he wants with it. He can save it to a database, he can display it to the user using a GUI, a browser, or even on mobile. You can use Java on mobile too, so you can use this string for a mobile label in a mobile application. But because I have that kind of freedom, I can use this string, in our case, in the console, to output it in the console. So that's a very flexible piece of code. It does a calculation, it converts it into a string, and returns it as a string, and I can do it whatever I want. Let's output it. 2 plus 3 equals 5. Like in the last lesson, but this time we separated our concerns more. And made our code a little bit more flexible. This is a great example of a simple, flexible code. So we used the plus method, formatted the arguments we get from the plus s argument, and incremented the result in the end, and returned it as a string. So basically what return does is you declare the return type of the method, what the method will return, and then you use the return keyword to return whatever value you want. It doesn't have to be a variable. We can put a number here, but I do want it to be a variable. Most of the time it will be a variable and not a hard-coded value like 9 or a string. In this case, you can use any data type, and the way you use it is by, once you call the method, you can store the result of the method inside a variable. In Java, you can return only one value, usually. You can return more values if you use an array or an array list or a class. You will see in later lessons this will probably come up, but this is the most basic usage of a return. This will make your code more modular. As you can see, it's already very modular. And it's the standard practice in the industry, object-oriented programming, as of now. So, if you don't understand this or anything, you may contact me via the Q&A. You can also go to the Java documentation, and you can see how they in their example they calculate an area of a rectangle, width and the height, and they return it as an int, the area. Well, it's not very friendly for a beginner. I would type on Google a Java method tutorial. It's nice once you master Java a little bit more. So we have our small lesson code, which I think is more clear than what we have there. We can delete this as we don't use it. And also, after the return statement, the method stops executing. So if I put some code here, I will have an error which says unreachable code, because it executes after the return. Everything after the return stops executing. So it's a good way to also stop a method from running with if statements. You will see in later lessons, you will see this a lot, but this is a very basic usage. In this level, in your level, you I think you should be able to understand everything. In the next lesson I will probably cover scopes. And that's it for this lesson.